Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Somm TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. On today's pod, I have my great friend Steve Matthiasson, member of almost every film I've directed in the wine world, and just like one of the best humans that exists, to talk about wine in the ancient world, particularly the time of Christ, the Romans. Hey, it's Christmas. I like history and I like wine, so let's do it. Before I do, I want to talk to you guys about Somm TV. As always, it is the perfect gift, especially for you last-minute shoppers. $49.99 for the year, and if you are a Somm TV subscriber, we are giving away a bottle of 2013 Screaming Eagle to one person who gifts Somm TV to somebody else before New Year's. So we're going to draw that on Instagram, and you'll hear the answer here too as far as who won. So sommtv.com for a chance to win that. And without further ado, my buddy Steve Matthiasson. Steve, how you doing?
Doing great, and you?
Good. Are you busy? Are things just really fast? Is it calm up there yet? Harvest is done.
Oh yeah, it's never really calm. And wine is a year-round kind of cycle, and so as soon as we finish harvest, we in the vineyards we have to spread compost and plant seeds, and look into new vineyards, and then in the winery we've been bottling, and we just bottled vermouth, for example, and we're doing the tissue wrapping on the Phoenix cab, getting that ready to ship out, and we shipped all of our jam to all the people in the wine club, and we had to label all our jars of jam, and it just continues, but it's all good stuff. Harvest is that time where you just huddle up because you have to really not screw up. So this time, even though we have a ton going on this time of the year, it's totally different in the sense that, if we didn't get the jam labeled today, tomorrow will be okay. Or maybe if the labels aren't perfectly straight. So it's definitely a more mellow time of the year.
If anyone listening has not had the vermouth that Steve, his wife Jill, and their team make, it is just phenomenal. It is so good. And I know you guys, it always sells out and it disappears, but man, the Matthiasson vermouth is outrageously good. It's something that I think vermouth is criminally underrated as it is. But boy, you guys do a good job. This is off topic, but I just want to say it's really good stuff. So I'm glad you guys are bottling that.
It's a little on topic because vermouth is ancient, right? So we can talk about that, when the time comes. But it's probably the earliest form of wine as they added herbs and stuff to the wine.
Right. That's right. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. One of the things that you and I, going all the way back to Into the Bottle and anytime we've ever met, we really bonded on our love of history. And unlike, I make films and I do this stuff, but you actually, being a winemaker are part of history in an everyday way that most people don't touch. And you went further this year with something involving history than I think you've ever gone. And you made, I'm holding it in my hand right now, something called Ancient Wine #1. And I want to get to why the hell you did this. I'm drinking it. It is an incredibly unique wine. It is just like nothing else I have had. And it is so fascinatingly interesting, but also delicious. Let's start off, before we talk about the wine you've done, let's start off with Christmas is coming. And I thought this would be an interesting thing to talk about what type of wine they made and what they drank during the time of Christ. You had a confluence of the Romans. And at that point, obviously Christianity and Judaism and all these things. What were they drinking in that time period? Because I'm assuming that is definitely an influence on this wine I'm drinking that you made.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think for starters, the wine they were drinking was probably good. One of the interesting things when you're into history and ancient history and you ever get a chance to go to an ancient archaeological site and you be in that, you exist and spend a little time in that space, you realize they were people too. And like, for example, I just was in this 10,000-year-old cave in Oaxaca last week and they had this like stone bed that was smooth from all of the generations of people that used that perfect piece of stone as a bed. And the guide says, go ahead and lay on it. It's really comfortable. And I was like, it's really comfortable. Well, why would that be a surprise? It's not like people 10,000 years ago didn't like being comfortable. And so, I'm pretty sure the wine back then tasted good. You think, oh, that was weird, plonky, bizarre shit they were drinking back then. And I don't think that's the case. I think it was good. And some of our varieties, our grape varieties, are several thousand years old. So in some cases, they were the same varieties that exist now. So like in Israel, for example, we did a tasting this summer of indigenous varieties to that part of the Middle East that those particular varieties predated the Romans, and some of them are still being cultivated. And we know in some archaeological digs, they dug up some seeds from the 2,000 years ago and did the DNA and figured out that these varieties are still kicking around, kind of go back that far or are closely related. And the wines were really delicious. Made with the ones we tasted were modern winemaking, but were totally delicious. And so, in wine, you crush it up, you put it in a tank, you ferment it, and you put it in a bottle. So it's not like winemaking techniques were that different at that time, so that we can't actually think about what the wine might have tasted like. And so we do know that there was a lot of blending going on, a lot of co-fermenting. It wasn't as much varietally focused as now. And place was still the big part of it. I read that back earlier. We're talking 5,000 years ago in Egypt. They had their version of AVAs that had different pricing associated with the wine based on where it was from. A factor of 2 or 3 based on where it was from. Price wise, and they have the records on that. So again, none of this stuff that we're doing now is that new. Actually, I think it's more similar than what we would guess, is my take. Although there was that tradition of adding herbs and spices to wine, but not always, but sometimes, to make them either tastier or healthier.
When you talk about modern versus ancient winemaking technique, modern, I think we can picture, barrels or tanks, or, even if you're not a winemaker, you've been exposed to that type of thing. What is ancient winemaking? So how did they do it if they didn't have barrels or they didn't have giant tanks? What were they using?
Yeah, so one of the things that they would do that's common all throughout the Mediterranean area is they would dig out these like tanks, open top tanks, out of rock, basically. And they would have they'd cut in a little spout area on one side that they could block up with a piece of wood. And then the grapes go in there, then they stomp them and crush them and get them started to ferment, so that you get a little bit of a cap, and then they could drain off the juice into another tank down below it by gravity and ferment it there. And that was considered like the better quality. And then the pressing of it was like a cheaper wine that they'd separate out. And then the good quality stuff, they'd finish fermenting it, and then they would age it in clay amphora, which again, people have gone back to that now. And you taste amphora wines, and sure, they're a little different, but it's not that different, really. You don't have the oak flavor, but clay versus stainless steel versus concrete, for example, those are not that different from each other. A little bit more oxygen transfer in the amphora, so it might age nicely, probably better than stainless steel. But anyways, then they'd age it and sell it. And they'd sell it. In some cases, they sold, like the Romans sold wine up as far. They found clay amphora all the way up in Norway. Like a lot of them that they would buy from Southern Europe, and they loved it. And so that's what I mean. Like even like the current tradition of like we are in California drinking French wine, for example. Well, the shipping wine lasts, and so the shipping of wine goes way, way back, many thousands of years. So people might like wine from this region or that region, depending on what they're eating. All that stuff's been going on a long time.
I don't think the modern population gives enough credit to the historic population for doing things that we do now. I think everybody just sort of thinks like, oh, that was the Dark Ages, or they never heard of a thing, when really they were the ones who implemented a lot of the stuff that we use today. It's kind of a really fascinating thing. So what was the wine quality like? Did they have red wine, white wine? What were they actually drinking, in a sense? What did it look like, taste like, smell like?
Some of these varieties, some of the white grape varieties go way back. Like some of them, like Chenin Blanc, maybe 1,000 to 2,000 years old. Carol Meredith actually knows a lot about how old some of these varieties are, and she was referred to Chenin Blanc as a mother variety, meaning a lot of other varieties spun off of it, and it's really freaking old. So that's a white, for example. So we know that there is plenty of examples of white grapes and red grapes in the ancient times. We know that they were there's a lot of co-fermentation going on. In some cases, just a small amount of white into a red to fix the color. Like we now know it's called co-pigmentation, but and how the tannins and anthocyanins kind of come together in a small amount of white grapes. You can actually have more fixed color in the red wine. But they were, the old plantings were like that. And they just knew that from practical experience. So we know they had reds. We know they had whites. We know that they had white wine in a modern sense, in a way, and because they would press off the juice and ferment it away from the skins. But we also, they did like orange wines out of white grapes also, so skin contact fermentations. So I think it was the whole gamut, basically.
Yeah, I'm tasting. So the part of the thing, it's so great to have you on this. Aside from, spoiler alert, you're in the next Somm film, which comes out in September, which definitely, let's just say, it goes pretty deep into what we're talking about in a certain manner. But also, you made this ancient wine, and I think it's really interesting to see the way you've taken your winemaking career and not just gone, Cabernet sells, this sells, I'll make that. I can't believe the amount of experimentation you and your wife Jill and your team do up where you are in Napa. I mean, it's just, not only is it not normal for Napa, it's just not normal in general. And so to listeners, I'm drinking this wine Steve made called Ancient Wine Number One. And it is on the back. I'm just going to read this, Steve, if you don't mind. On the back, it says, inspired by ancient Greece and Rome, whole cluster fermentation, multi vintage, ingredients, grapes, and Aleppo pine resin. This is just such. You're kind of like the velvet revolver of like winemakers up there. I don't know what the hell you're doing. So I'm drinking it. It's got this yellow, orange, oxidized kind of color. It's incredibly balanced, which I wouldn't have expected. I would have thought this would have tasted oxidized but it's fresh and it's got this, I don't get as much of the pine flavor, but I have to know where the hell did the idea come from? I mean, is this like retsina in Greece? I mean, what made you want to make this type of a wine? And where'd you get the instructions, the inspiration and the instructions?
Yeah. Well, so and Jill and I both have always loved retsina. A lot of people hate on retsina, and I think they're just not giving it a chance, especially with food.
What is retsina? Do you want to explain?
Yeah. So retsina is generally a modern retsina is white wine that has Aleppo pine resin added to it. And so you get usually at a higher level. And so you get this like real piney flavor in the wine. It kind of dominates the nose typically is this like really piney flavor. So it's like generally it's a kind of a lower alcohol, crisp white wine with this piney flavor, and you get it at Greek restaurants. And I think it's really delicious with Greek food. But again, you have to like the flavor of pine basically. But that's an example of an ancient winemaking tradition that's just stood the test of time and carried through to this day. And so I just liked retsina, and I always admired what Dogfish Head did with the Midas Touch, where they tried to recreate the beer that King Tut was buried with. So this archaeologist, Patrick McGovern, analyzed the inside of the clay amphora that was in King Tut's tomb and figured out that it was made of dates, barley, and grapes. And so he collaborated with Dogfish Head to make the Midas Touch. And I just, to see what we could try to taste what King Tut was buried with. And I thought that was just so cool. What an amazing connection to the past. And so I met Patrick McGovern at a conference, and I was like, hey, I told him that, and I was like, did you ever want to collaborate on anything wine-wise? And he said, well, I'd love to taste ancient retsina. So basically he sent me these translations of recipes from like Pliny the Elder wrote about it, people from that era. And it's so amazing because with the Romans had, everything's recorded. They were great engineers, right? And so their units actually are translatable to the current time. So I just had to do some searching to find out convert Roman units to metric units. So I could figure out like how much pine sap to add and stuff, and based it. And so we literally had a recipe from 2,000 years ago. And then the crazy thing is I looked up modern retsina and it's pretty similar. So that's back to the idea that our tastes aren't that different. I mean, physiologically, we're identical to people 2,000 years ago, and they kind of liked a similar amount of pine sap that we like. So I was like, okay, Aleppo pine sap. Well, the problem is, where do you get Aleppo pine sap? And so my mom has 2 Aleppo pine trees in her backyard in Tucson because they're a desert, adapted pine tree. And I tried other pine saps, and none of the other ones had that like crisp, like crystalline piney punch that the Aleppo did. And so, so we got as much sap as we could off of the 2 trees. And so it's not super piney because we just didn't have enough sap, unfortunately. But what I learned was even at a lower level of sap, it's an unbelievable antioxidant. So you comment on how fresh that wine is. the pine sap, it acts like SO2. It keeps it really fresh and keeps it from oxidizing, to the point where I thought that the wine was too rough, because like an orange wines can be really tannic until they have a chance to oxidize. So then the next year, instead of adding it to the fermentation, we added it later to give it a chance to oxidize a bit and soften for the other two vintages. Because if you add it too soon, it like preserves it too well. And I mentioned that to Patrick McGovern, and he sent me a few like scientific papers on like the antibacterial and antioxidant powers of pine sap, basically. So it was a great preservative that, just like hops in beer, that people developed a taste for. Because
So I had heard, Steve. Well, I had heard that, really, just sorry to interrupt. I had heard that pine ended up in retsina as a sealant for the lid on amphora. So you're telling me that pine was added as an antioxidant or as a flavor device?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
They meant for it to taste like pine.
I think it's not. I think that a lot of archaeologists that would write about why the use of pine aren't flavor people, and so it was inconceivable that someone might like the flavor. Like I was looking.
I love it. I love it.
It's so refreshing, isn't it? But like
it's great. It's
they can focus in on like, because the problem is like we were in this cave in Oaxaca looking at the cave drawings that when I mentioned the bed. And I was like, to me, it looked like a person protecting their farm from this wild animal. And the guide was like, "Oh yeah, I know we think that those symbols it had are like symbols of rain, and the person had this whole like thing this person was doing that was more ritualistic." And I was like, "That's bullshit. The person is protecting their farm." But then they're like, "Well, that's because you're a farmer and that's what you see in it." But so for me as a flavor person, you would not use pine sap. If you didn't like the flavor, you'd use something else to seal the amphora. I'm sure there's a ton of different things you could use to seal the amphora that would taste good. And so they pick something they like.
How dare you use logic, Steve? This is not what this is not what people do anymore. This is not the age of logic. I love, it's interesting. This is your first time you've attempted something like this. Were you happy with the results? Did it have enough pine flavor? Is it oxidized?
I'm really happy.
It's so hard to classify this wine. I don't know what to call it, because it's not an orange wine. It's not a retsina. It's certainly not like anything I've ever tasted from California, let alone Napa. It is so unique, but yet I could pour this for almost anyone I know and they would go, "Hey, this is cool. I like this." Meaning like somehow it's not out there in a way that's not attractive. I think that's really an amazing accomplishment. So what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. And so I was just really thinking about with this wine, what people would eat also in the Mediterranean era back then. And so, cooking over wood and a lot of fish. And so like, to me, an oily grilled fish, like a warmer fish, like mackerel over a wood fire with this wine, with maybe
anchovies, maybe
fresh anchovies, some goat cheese, salty goat cheese or feta, olive oil, olives. Well, it's just perfect.
Oh, I'm hungry. I'm like, now I'm wishing I had that in front of me with this wine. So I before you were about to mention something in a quality of hops in beer, and I cut you off. What were you saying? Hops is used in beer similar to pine resin?
Yeah, because there's the hops. The idea was that hops were preservative, and then it was an acquired taste to like the flavor of them, right? So I think that it's very much the same situation with the pine resin.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, hops is one of those things that I have a love-hate relationship with. I don't know that it has to be pushed as far as it's being pushed right now in beer, but at the same time, I like the flavor of hops. That is a very delicious taste. It's just like anything else, oak included, anything, there's a limit. It doesn't need that much. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion, but also, I'm just a podcast host.
Yeah.
So basically to take this back, the wine that the ancient, I like that you point out that physiologically these people were the same as us. They were no dumber or smarter. They were just like we are, and looking at them and superimposing our kind of modern beliefs on these people is kind of futile, but they were drinking wine that was, in your best estimation, similar to the wine that you have made in this ancient wine.
That was our attempt on this, was to try to get a little peek into what do their wine taste like. Have you had any problems selling it?
Probably you didn't make enough that this is an issue.
No, we didn't make very much. Yeah, no, we tried to spread it out so that some of with this particular one we put into distribution so we could get to cool restaurants that would geek out on telling the story to people.
Well, I
'cause
remember
this
I
is just a
called you.
fun thing.
I remember I called you. I said, "Can I get a case?" You're like, "No, you can get like 5 or 6 bottles." But I was like, "Please." And then it's one of these things where I didn't really realize how small the production was too when I was asking, and it's an incredible thing. So now, was it successful enough that you're going to make more? And can listeners buy this wine? I mean, what do we? Where do we go from here?
It's all sold out. Listeners are unfortunately, I don't know. Maybe they can find it somewhere. Because I forget how much we made of it, but it was like maybe 60 or 80 cases. And to put it in perspective,
Oh, wow.
we
Okay.
have 60 markets for our wine, like 43 states and about 15 or 20 countries. And so, like New York State, the whole state got 12 bottles. So it's that kind of situation. So this is a fun thing. The next one is that we want to work on. I just blew it this year and couldn't get it together. But the next one is another thing that they tended to do a lot was use salt ocean water in the wine. And so it was another. So the idea was, and I'm trying to parse out how much of that's a flavor enhancer versus how much is a preservative. I love salinity in wine, and so it was actually super common to use some seawater in your wine, and they had all these protocols that you have to get out in a boat and get clean water from away from the shore and stuff. And so that's what I want to try with like a Vermentino or something like that. That's the next one, or like a really light-bodied, high-acid red. Ferment it with the seawater and just see what that salty wine tastes like.
Hold on. So what time period in human history are we talking here? Are we talking like Roman times? Are we talking like
they're talking we're probably, I'm going to take a guess that there was 3,000 years of winemaking they were using seawater at least.
Interesting.
So it had to be good. They wouldn't have kept doing it.
A lot of people use salinity. I think it's almost become one of these terms that is malused, I mean, there are certain wines that have that quality quite a bit, but we're not actually talking about real sodium chloride in wine. I mean, it's not
right.
It's not really a salt quality. It is, but it's more of a you're literally talking about salting the wine. This is incredible.
Yeah,
so you guys listening to this,
ocean water.
No one's ever said this to me, but if you are wondering why the hell I keep having Steve on and keep having Steve in all of my content and it's this kind of stuff. This guy is the best. So I'm going to be the first in line to try your red salty wine. What's the ratio? And is it normal to add water to wine?
I'm trying to figure that out, but I'm trying to figure that out. But the nice thing is there's a ton of recipes, and a lot of them involve drying the grapes in the sun for a while also. So it could,
so like an Amarone kind of thing, or
can you imagine like a salty Amarone? Like that could be really delicious.
It'd be good.
Kind of like a salted caramel.
It would be delicious. It would also definitely get you drunk very quick, I have a feeling.
Yeah, right. But you'd be hydrated because the electrolytes.
Yes, I'd be very hydrated. Definitely. Steve, this is so great. I love it so much. Where can people get your wines? Let's plug your site so everybody knows where to get your wines, which I highly recommend.
So we're at Matthiasson.com, 2 T's and 2 S's.
Matthiasson.com. If you've ever watched Into the Bottle, Psalm 3, and definitely our upcoming film, Cup of Salvation, which is, I'll just say, very important to me. Steve's fantastic. And Steve, it's a pleasure to have you on. I really appreciate it, bud.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Don't forget to go to Matthiasson's website, 2 T's, 2 S's, Matthiasson.com. Grab some of that wine. PsalmTV.com is the perfect gift. I'm not kidding you guys. This is all handmade stuff. I am working with a very small, dedicated team, and we work our asses off. And we love what we do, and we love you guys to subscribe. If you gift Psalm TV before the first of the year, you're entered into a drawing for a bottle of 2013 Screaming Eagle. So it's a worthwhile thing, plus a great gift. Everybody, please be safe and enjoy the holidays with family. Talk soon.